Yo, what's up guys? It's a new sensation, Bigger Notation here, and today I'm going to be bringing you guys something a little bit more fun that I've been messing with recently, and that is one of the very old Jiren leaders. And some of you might not remember what it is, but we'll dive into that in just a second. But before we get into the actual deck profile, I want to preface this by saying this is obviously not meant to be any sort of competitive list. This is just something fun that you might want to take to locals and mess around with. I'm planning to potentially take this to a fight night if there happens to be one coming up. So you might see me bringing this to a fight night if there's one that ends up happening soon. So definitely watch out for that. But yeah, it's just a little bit more fun. The leader does some really funny things and people on Untap get kind of annoyed from playing against it. So I'll just briefly explain what the deck does. So first off, diving right into the leader. Leader is very simple, as with a lot of the older leaders. He just states, when this card attacks a leader card, you can discard a Universe 11 from your hand and then draw 2 cards. So one of the main annoying stipulations about this is he has to attack a leader card. So you have to watch out for that in the early game. You can't really focus on clearing their board. But it does offer you some really nice draw power, and it fills up the drop area, which is very relevant to the leader's awaken side. And then when your life is at 4 or less, he can awaken, and he untaps 2 on awaken, which is a awaken ability that we haven't seen in really a long time, because I feel like Bandai realized that getting 2 energy back on any one turn is really quite a powerful ability, and so they kind of toned it down when it came to awakens that can untap you 2 energy. But then for the backside of the leader, again, he's got a very simple auto. On attack, he just draws a card. So you're not able to fuel the drop area anymore, you're not able to see as many cards, but you're now able to attack into your opponent's battle cards and start clearing their board. But realistically, you're not going to be doing that once you've awakened with this leader, because once you've awakened, you want to use the activate main on the leader, and that is, you choose 9 Universe 11s in your drop area and send them to your warp, and this card gains quadruple strike for the turn. So on paper that looks very, very scary until you realize that that's an activate main ability, not an activate battle. So you can just easily get negated from using the activate main and then swinging with the leader. Your opponent will most likely try and negate the attack. And also, it's a very hefty cost. Choosing 9 Universe 11s from your drop area and sending them to your warp means that you're likely not going to be able to play Overwhelms in the deck, but also you're only really going to be able to pull this off once per game, because it's very unlikely you get to a point where you can fill your drop area with 18 Universe 11s. I'm not even sure that the deck runs that many Universe 11s, so you're very unlikely to get to a point where you can use that effect twice, so you have to make sure that the one time that you use it really counts. And I'll get into why you can, or how you can go about doing that later on in the deck profile, because there are some cards that really help you pull that off. But in short, this leader and this entire deck is built around swinging with your leader for a quadruple strike for game. And we'll kind of delve into why some of the issues that we originally prefaced around the leader, some of the restrictions that it has, can kind of be mitigated by some of the other cards that we're running. So first off, to mitigate for the lack of draw that the leader has, with a lot of leaders these days, you're able to draw like 2 or 3 cards a turn, just off of some of like the leader effects or some of the effects that the archetype might give you. But Universe 11 has kind of been under supported in the yellow color, at least. I think the last time that the Universe 11 stuff got any sort of support in yellow was in set 9, and that's kind of outdated to this day. We're 6 sets ahead of that already, so the cards have been kind of power creeped a little bit. But to help with your leader's draw power, because you're only seeing 2 new cards a turn and you're discarding 1 Universe 11 every turn, and then even on the awaken side you're only seeing 1 new card per turn, we're going to be running 4 copies of the Dispo Successor. So this card is a barrier 15k Successor for 1 yellow energy, and for those that don't remember, because I feel like Successor hasn't really been played outside of Salzino, Successor is you have to send battle cards from your board that are green, yellow, or green-yellow multicolor, that add up to the exact energy cost of the card that you're playing, and then you can play out the card for a reduced cost. So in this case, you'll be playing it down for 1 yellow energy and then 4 total cost of battle cards from your board. So for anyone who's come from Yu-Gi-Oh like I have, that will reminisce very similarly to synchro summoning mechanic, because it's basically the same thing but without the whole tuner aspect. But yeah, it just means you can play this guy for a very reduced cost from your hand, and then if your leader is a Universe 11 card, when you play this card, or if it's placed in the drop area from your battle area by a skill, you can draw a card. Now notice that has no once per turn restrictions on it. You can use both skills of the same card in the turn, and you can use multiple copies of the same card in a turn as well. So this is your really powerful draw power engine in the deck, and you want to be chaining Dispo on Dispo as much as you can, because sending Dispo for its own successor skill counts as sending it to the drop area by a skill. So every time you have Dispo on the board and then you successor off another Dispo for Dispo, you're drawing 2 cards. And that's actually really strong, and that's not even taking into account that their 15k barrier swings every single time. So this is your main way of pressuring your opponent down to 4 life if they're not already taking their life down to 4 anyway. But it's also going to give you a whole lot of draw power. And then to support with that engine, so obviously it's very well and good once you've got a Dispo on the board and you're able to start chaining Dispo through Dispo, but you have to actually get that initial Dispo onto the board for that to have any sort of impact in the game. So to help with that, we've got 4 of a promo Topo. And for those that don't remember, this is a barrier 16k, and very simply, it just has a permanent increase the energy cost of this card by 2. So that obviously being a permanent will only take place when it's on your battle area. So you can play this guy for 2 energy and then he becomes a 4-drop on your board. In this deck, we're not going to be playing this guy for 2 energy because we're not going to be charging green energy. This deck is made to be mono yellow. We're only running these 8 multicolor cards in the deck, and we don't want to ever be charging these if possible. But this guy is how you're mainly going to be getting into your Dispo, because he's a cheap way to make the 4 energy requirement for the successor on your battle area. So you just get this guy onto the board, and then because he's barrier, he's going to be pretty hard to remove. And then you can just start cycling through your Dispos. And because your Dispos are also barrier, they're also going to be pretty tricky to remove. So you can likely just sit on them for a couple of turns until you see your other Dispos and start going up the chains. And then the main card that will help you get your Topo onto the board is one of the newer cards from the Anniversary box, and that is Swift Rescue Dispo. So it's unique 16k, and it has a activate battle for 1 yellow energy. If your leader is a mono yellow Universe 11 card and it's your opponent's turn, you play this card from your hand in rest mode. So it's a way to get this guy out for very cheap. And also has a limit 1 auto, discard 1 card from your hand. When this card is played, you play a yellow Universe 11 card with an energy cost of 2 from your drop area in rest mode with its skills negated for the turn. So during your opponent's turn, you can, when they swing, you can tap 1, play this in rest mode, discard 1, and then play the Topo in rest mode. Now, it's important to note that they'll both be played in rest mode, so they can both be attacked into, and also the Topo will have its skills negated, so it will not have barrier for the turn that it's played down. So it's very important to time this well, because you don't want to be doing this necessarily on your opponent's first attack of the turn, because then they'll have a bunch more attacks, and even though these guys are 16k, so they're reasonably big in defense at least, they're still going to be a lot of cards that can just attack over them, and it's very important to be wary of that. So it's kind of tricky to time this card, but you have to make sure that you're timing it well. And even if you're not bringing back the Topo, you can bring back just any sort of 2-drop or 1-drop U11 that you have in the deck that you might have placed in the drop area, and that will, if you bring back a 1-drop, or if you already have a 1-drop on board and Dispo survives, then that will meet the 4 energy cost requirement for your Dispos, and then you can start successoring from there. So it's important not to get stuck in the idea that Topo is your only way to successor up Dispo, because any energy cost of 4 combination on your battle area is going to meet that requirement. And the main important thing is just to get your successor dispos chained onto the board. And you don't need to worry about necessarily sticking a topo, although that is the ideal scenario for this deck, and that's the ideal combo, really. So that's like the main way that you fix your draw power in this deck, and the other main way that you fix your draw power is this casserole. So he's very simple, he's just a 1-drop. When he's played, you look at the top 5 cards of your deck, then you add a yellow unison with a specified cost of 2, which we are playing a specified cost 2 unison in this deck, or a universe 11 that costs 4 or less from the top 5 cards to your hand. Then he also has an effect. When this card is switched to rest mode by one of your skills, you can switch one of your opponent's battle cards that cost 4 or less to rest mode. I don't think that that's ever really going to come up in this deck. I don't think you really run any cards that switch your own battle cards to rest mode. But this card is mostly just in the deck as a 1-drop way to spend your energy proactively and also to get you some hand advantage. And it's also another Universe 11 name. You need to run a lot of Universe 11s to be able to consistently get off your leader's activate main enough, because that's your main win condition, and you need to have it live by around turn 3 or turn 4 if you're looking to close out the game. And so for some other Universe 11 names, we have 3 Vuon and 2 Kunchi. So Vuon is very simply just a 1-drop blocker, and Kunchi is a 1-drop, and when he is in the battle area, all Universe 11 cards with energy costs of 2 or less in your battle area gain barrier, and that doesn't exclude itself, so he is going to be a 1-drop barrier, and he's going to be giving all of your other cards barrier. This is just a nice combo for any yellow Universe 11 deck. It gives you some barrier blockers if you can get both of them out. Most of the time you're not going to be investing energy into these, and a lot of the time these are just discard targets for your leader. But the main way that you're going to be bringing them out is with the TP Jiren. And for those that don't know, this is a 2-drop 15k, but most of the time that's completely irrelevant because you can discard him from your hand, and if your leader's U11, you can bring back 2 1-drop U11 cards with energy cost of 1 from your drop area, but their skills are negated for the turn. And that's tacked on to an activate main, so you can just discard this anytime you want, and it's not even once per turn, it's not limit 1, anything like that. You just discard this, you can bring back your Kunchi and your Vuon, and then as soon as you pass turn, the skills become live again, and for your opponent's turn, you'll have barrier blockers. So having any number of copies of this in your hand is really strong, and I could honestly see myself bumping this up to 4 copies, although most of the time you don't really need the barrier blockers, because most of the time all this deck wants to do is start chaining dispos. But this can be a nice way to access a 1-drop in case you have 3 energy costs or 2 energy costs in your battle area. This can make up that for 0 energy because it can bring back 2 1-drops from your drop area. And then for a couple of 1-offs to round out the last U11s, I'm running 1 Belmod the Self-Indulgent and 1 Jiren Universe's Strongest. The Belmod is really not that great of a card. The only reason I'm running it is I felt like I needed 1 more Universe 11 in the deck, and I could honestly see myself adding another Universe 11 into this deck just as like a name. But the Belmod is like, he has relevant effects in certain matchups because he becomes a 2-drop when you have a 2-cost unison in play, and then he can either counterplay and play itself and then act as a giant ball, so the card being played gets played in rest mode, or he can negate the attack, play this card, and then choose one of your opponent's battle cards and negate its skills for the turn. So like, it's not, on paper it's not a bad card, it's just the fact that it's too expensive, because even when you have the unison in play, this card is still only a 2-drop, and paying 2 for a counterplay or paying 2 for a counter attack is still really expensive in today's meta. I could see myself maybe cutting this card and running some other Universe 11s, like just bumping up the number of Vuons and the TP Jiren maybe, but I think that just having the flexibility of having this card in the deck is fine as well. The main issue that I have with this card is your Unison is a 2-drop and it's 15k and it only pluses 1 every turn, so fairly often your Unison is going to die pretty early on in the game, so this card doesn't get the cost reduction as much, and then it just becomes a 4-drop that's dead in your hand. But the card's not terrible. I guess it's mostly just run for the Universe 11 name, and a lot of the time you're just discarding it early game for your leader's effect. And then this 12 drop Jiren is actually really relevant in the deck. So he's a 40k deflect quadruple strike. He has 2 permanents, the first one being if there are 9 or more Universe 11 cards in your drop area, you reduce the energy cost of this card in your hand by 6, so it becomes a 6 drop. And then during battles, when this card attacks, your opponent cannot activate counter or blocker skills. So this is like everything that your leader wants to be, basically. Because it has that 40k and it has the quad strike tag, but it also doesn't have the problem of your opponent can negate or just block the attack. And so basically this card is your win condition when your opponent tries to stall you out, because this deck doesn't really have any self-awakening. Your leader doesn't have any inherent self-awakening, which is a big problem for you. So a lot of the times this deck just gets stalled out at high life, especially if you're facing a color like blue. Your leader will just get stalled out, and then eventually they'll just try and kill you in one turn with like an Android 17 or something. And so this is your answer to that kind of strategy. Is if they're trying to stall you out, you just stall until turn 6, find this card, and then try and kill them the way that your leader wanted to, basically. And on a much bigger body as well. Like the fact that this guy is 40k quad strike is so relevant. And then for the super combos, we're running 4 of the Universe 11 Cocotte super combos. And this card says when you combo with this card, if your leader is a Universe 11 and you have 5 or less life, you draw a card, then this card gains 10k combo power for the battle. I really wish that this was a Sparking 5 super combo sometimes, because as I said before, a lot of the times you're going to get stalled out at higher than 4 life, and that can become a really big problem for you, because then your super combos are turned off and you're not going to be able to win through your leader's quad strike skill. So sometimes I do wish this was a Sparking 5 super combo, but the fact that this is another Universe 11 name as well just makes it too good not to play. And I feel like if I were to cut this and run a Sparking 5 super combo, I'd have to up the other Universe 11s, and the other Universe 11s are a lot worse than just running a nice super combo in there. So that's all of the U11s for the deck. I don't know how many there are, I haven't counted them, but there's a fair bit. I think that's probably going to be over half the deck, maybe 30 or so. So there's definitely enough for you to theoretically get the activate main off twice in a game, but it's very rarely going to happen. Because if you're getting it off once, you're most likely winning the game, unless your opponent somehow stayed at more than 4 life for the entire game. And so getting it off twice is very, very unlikely. The reason that I say that you'll probably just win if you get the activate main off once in a game is because of the existence of this card. Swift Retaliation Cooler, we're running 3 copies of it. This card just makes the deck go. It has amazing synergy with your leader, and this is how you get around the fact that your leader has an activate main skill and not an activate battle skill, by making it so if your opponent tries to negate the attack once you've given your leader quad strike, you can just negate the negate, and then you get to draw some extra cards for when you want to combo it all in on your quad strike. This card is just like insane, and the fact that it's only 3 energy is insane, and it just means that you can oftentimes just kill your opponent turn 3 or turn 4 with this deck for little to no reason. And then for the Unison, we're running 4 copies of the Gogeta Dynamic Unison. So this deck, obviously you really want to be filling up your drop area with U11s in this deck, so that you can meet the requirements for your leader's activate main, and this is just going to help you do that. Not only that, but it offers your leader some extra protection, because if all of your energy is in rest mode, your leader gains 5k during your opponent's turn. So if you're against a really hyper aggressive deck who's putting you really low life on those early turns, this card will just help you survive that extra mile, because it will give your leader a Senzu Bean every time you pass turn, basically. It also has some added benefits of gaining markers when your opponent activates an extra card, and the -4 is nice but not entirely relevant. Sometimes I do want to change up this Unison, but there's really not that many better alternatives for the deck, because this card just helps you fill up your drop area so much, and that is the main objective for this deck. And then obviously to go with your Unison, we're running 3 of the Vegeta counterplays. I don't think 4 is correct for this deck, and sometimes I don't even feel like 3 is correct. I feel like you could potentially even cut this to 2. because as I mentioned earlier, your unisons are 15k and it's only plussing 1 each turn. And because you don't have any free negates to go with it because you're in yellow, the free negates are really not that good for yellow. I think it's, I don't even remember what the free negate when you have a unison in play is called. I just remember that it's not amazingly good. So you don't really have any ways to protect your unison when it's played on turn 2. And so running like a huge number of Vegetas, running 4 copies of this, I don't think is correct. And sometimes 2 copies feels like it would be better than 3 copies, but when your unison does survive, this card feels amazing just because it offers you, effectively stops 2 attacks, because you can stop the card that they're playing by switching it to rest mode, and you get a blocker on board. So it's really not a bad card, it's just never going to be as good as the Trunks counterplay or the Freezer counterplay. And because you don't have enough protection for your unison, it's hard to warrant running 4 copies of it. And then for some of the better cards in the deck, I would argue, I'm running 2 copies of Final Flash and 2 copies of Power of a Super Saiyan. So these cards are obviously incredible cards for any sort of yellow deck, but they're especially good in this deck for the sole purpose of Final Flash being able to give your leader 15k power for the battle is insanely strong once your leader's swinging for that quad strike swing. And it means that if you're going in on turn 4 and you cool a counter their negate, then you have that 1 energy left open for the Final Flash, and it can boost up your leader and make it really hard to out combo. And not only that, but it can negate some skills. So if your opponent has some defensive skills, like this was a lot more relevant before the Violent Rush Bojack ban, because you could negate their Aegis skill through barrier. But if your opponent's running any sort of Aegis cards or anything like that, you can negate the skills of that. And then Power of a Super Saiyan is obviously another great card for all yellow decks, but especially good in this deck because other than this card and a couple of other cards in the deck, you don't really have any outs to your opponent just slamming blockers onto the board. And so the way that you are best suited to out blockers in this deck is with Power of a Super Saiyan. And so if your opponent has 1 blocker on the board, you can just rest it with this and then go in with your leader swing. And then obviously Power of a Super Saiyan offers you some really nice defense during your opponent's turn as well. And then speaking of defense, we're running 2 copies of Flying Nimbus so that you don't die to aggro too hard. Sometimes I think that I'd prefer to replace this with like Self-Awakeners or something. And if you find that you're struggling more against control or hand control decks than you are against aggro, then maybe just replace these for some like crit Self-Awakeners or something. Because it really does feel awful in this deck when you're stalled at like 5 or 6 life and your opponent just drags out the game for like 4 or 5 turns longer than it should do. And this deck doesn't really struggle against aggro as much as I thought it would, just because of the existence of Vegeta counterplay. Your unison gives your leader 5k during your opponent's turn. You have some fairly good like defensive options in the deck anyway. And you just get, like, you can swarm the board with blockers with your Jiren TP as well. I don't feel like the deck struggles as much against aggro, so I could definitely see myself replacing these for some Self-Awakeners. I'd have to test out the deck more, but like it's not a competitive deck, so I'm not massively worried about it. And then for the last 3 cards, I'm just running a Bergamo, a Frieza's Army Reinforcements, and a Saiyan Instincts. So Bergamo, it's a good card in yellow decks, but the only issue with it in this deck is there aren't really many ways to rest your opponent's stuff. The only card that I can think of in this deck that rests your opponent's stuff is Power of a Super Saiyan. But the main reason that I'm running it in this deck is because it has a really insane interaction with Power of a Super Saiyan, because for 2 energy, you're going to be resting 3 cards and drawing a card and getting a 20k body on the board. So just because of that interaction alone, and the defense and tempo that it provides you, I feel like it's worth running this card, even though sometimes it can feel a bit dead in your hand. And then Frieza Army Reinforcements, this is just a nice negate to have, and it can also help you Self-Awaken if you're getting stalled at exactly 5 life. Although I feel like most players will kind of assume that you're going to be running this card and try and stall you at higher than 5 life. But if your opponent doesn't think about that or doesn't take this card into consideration, it can really punish them. And then one Saiyan Instincts, I would really like to run more copies of this card, just to help you deal with not having such a great amount of draw power in the early game. But because you already have your Dispo Chain and you're often going to be getting that going by around turn 2 or turn 3, and this costs 2 energy, so it's pretty expensive to have in conjunction with your Dispo Chain. I haven't really found the space to run this at more than one copy yet. I'm not running a secret rare in this deck. Basically, the reason behind that is because the only one that I own that would really work in this deck is Heroine's Lineage, and I feel like that isn't a great secret rare to run for this deck, because it only offers you defense, and you already have what I feel like to be enough defense in this deck. I feel like this deck struggles with Self-Awakening and being able to push through to that quad strike point, but Heroine's Lineage is still a fine card to run. If you're missing any of the cards in this deck and you have a Heroine's Lineage, just put it in there because it's a good card. I think the main secret rare that I'd probably run in this deck, or the main two, would either be Supreme Kai or the Super 17 counterplay that came out in the recent set, I think set 14. I think those probably are going to be the two best cards to run in this deck if you have either of them. I just don't own them because they're pretty expensive. And then whilst we're on the topic of cards to consider, I have a couple of choices that you could run. I've already mentioned some Self-Awakeners. If you want to run just some one-drop cantrip cards that can take a life, or on swing they take a life and gain double strike, that kind of thing, feel free to. They definitely would work well in the deck, I feel like, because your leader really needs to actually awaken to be able to push through with the quad strike. But for some more defensive options, I was running Cocotte Zone, and this card is really insane for the deck. It's a 1-drop negate, and if your leader's a U11, then you can rest a battle card on top of negating the attack. So it's really nice for the deck. Obviously, stopping 2 attacks for 1 card is great, and it also is another card that can trigger Bergamo. I just feel like I ended up replacing this card with Frieza's Army Reinforcements because, again, the main issue with this deck is not being able to awaken. And so being able to take myself from 5 to 4 whenever I need to is, I feel like, more valuable than the extra defense that Cocotte Zone provides you. And the main advantage to Cocotte Zone is that it triggers Bergamo, but I feel like you're rarely going to be passing turn with 3 energy up. And Frieza's Army, the token generator negate, just has way too many advantages because it still stops 2 attacks, but you can also play it by taking a life to help yourself awaken. And it gives you so, like, it's just better, really, in my opinion. But if you want to run Cocotte Zone because you feel like you want more Bergamo triggers or something like that, feel free to. I was also running one Zoirei, the blocker where once per turn, if you have another U11, this card can't be KO'd. This card, basically, it's just too expensive for what it does because it costs 2 energy and not 1 energy. I couldn't warrant playing it. It was nice for the extra U11 name, and if you feel like you haven't got enough U11s in the deck, then this would be the card I'd recommend putting in, or just another copy of like the Bell mod or a Vuon or something like that. But I feel like the deck has enough U11s as is, and this card is just too expensive for not doing all that much. It's fine against aggro, but just tapping 2 energy for this card when you could be playing some negates for that, or playing your Unison, or doing something proactive with your dispos feels not the best, to be honest. And then one of the better Unison tech choices for yellow, in my opinion, is the Trunks Unison. Just offers you the ability to clear your opponent's board whenever you need to. And also being able to apply pressure with the 20k dual attack is really nice. I'm just not running this card because most of the time you don't need to clear your opponent's board, you just need to kill them with the quad strike, and so you just need to self-awaken yourself or let your opponent take you down to low life, and then you can most of the time just kill them. And also 3 energy is really expensive for this deck. You want to be using that 3 energy to Dispo Chain or to use your cooler counter instead if possible. And then the final card that I was considering running is the other big Jiren, not the 12 drop, but the 10 drop. This guy is just really nice because he's another quad strike, but he can also on play kill all of your opponent's battle cards and energy in rest mode. So He's just like pretty strong as a late game finisher, and his energy cost becomes reduced in your hand for each U11 in your battle area. The main issue with that is you don't really swarm the board as much as you might think in this deck. Most of your U11s are going to the drop area, which makes the 12 drop better, and the 12 drop also has deflect and has the permanent where your opponent can't counter or block the attack, which is really nice. But this card is still fine. It just, if you feel like you're going into those longer games where you're getting to 5 or 6 energy and you are able to keep a bunch of the Jiren TPs in your hand, you can discard a bunch of the Jiren TPs, bring back your 1-drops from the drop, and then slam this guy down as a really nice finisher. But that's basically the deck profile. Those are most of the cards that I'd consider running, other than adding in a couple of copies of the Saiyan Instincts or the Frieza's Army Reinforcements, or maybe some Self-Awakeners over the Flying Nimbuses. But I hope you guys enjoyed. Definitely stay tuned on the Fight Night front, because I'm hoping to play this deck whenever we get another Fight Night going. I will be bringing a few Jiren decks. We'll see how many I can put together, but this is hopefully going to be one of them. And I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys definitely take this for a spin on Untap or something, and maybe at locals. It's a really fun deck to try out, and hopefully I'll be able to take it to locals, because I haven't been able to take it there yet. I've just managed to put all of the bits together. But as always, thank you guys very much for watching. Subscribe if you're new, leave a comment down below to give me some feedback, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.